What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Adam, how you doing?
Life is good, Zach. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. You know, it's interesting. I talked to a variety of folks on and off the record and Living Corporate, but just in general, I continue to get excited about connecting with folks who exist at the intersection of employee experience, product strategy, sometimes DEI, but like at tech, and your profile. Like, it's just very interesting to me, right? Like, I look at the content that you write about, and you talk a lot about product strategy, about experience. You talk about experience of Black founders and like the VC space. I mean, your profile is really unique and it's really exciting to me. I'd love to understand more about, like, as I look at your website and as I just do my initial Googles on you, you have this deep product experience, like product and tech experience. Like, talk to me about how you got into like product development, product design, into the product space and in tech. Like, what did that look like? Is this because you got over 15 years in the domain? Talk to me about your early journey there.
Well, I had to take a deep breath because, yeah, like life is funny. Sometimes the journey of life is just this weird journey. And when I think about my product experience, it's a weird journey. So I started off I really started off working for my dad, fixing computers when I was younger and selling mixtapes and just kind of like this weird piratey lifestyle. When I went to school, I went to UMES, and when I was there, I was selling software and books. So me and my friend came up with this like scheme to sell books and software and like whatever people need. I had a corner store renting out my dorm room. It was a whole thing. And I almost got kicked out of my dorm by the dean of residency halls. Coming around, he did a sweep, and I was brazen back then. I didn't know anything about discretion. I had like the signs
Not
up
the
on
signs
my door.
so you like come in,
said,
we're selling things in here?
Come in, they're selling things. I got hot shoes, software, ramen noodles, whatever you need. I had like a price list on my door. I was just brazen with it.
Okay. Respect the hustle. Okay.
And he came in there and he was like, what is this? Some sort of bazaar? Old black men are hilarious. What is this? Some sort of bazaar you have running here? And luckily, I had bribed my RA at the time. And the RA came in and said, hey, he's a business student. This is a project. Got me out of it. I was a computer science. Nothing to do with business.
He got you smooth out that jam. That's wild.
Got me smooth out. Yeah, lesson number 1, pay off the right people. If you're doing illicit business, pay off the right people. It'll come back. But that's when I realized I should probably get out of this and start doing something different. And so I started my first startup. I was 19, and I started this video game site called The Gamer Studio. And this was back in 2006. And somehow I had a bunch of people following along with me. Very early in the podcasting and video space, we had a YouTube channel. We had a podcasting network. We did a lot of video game journalism, started to create our lane inside of that space. And I eventually sold that a couple years later, which that plus graduating led me here to New York City, where I now live. And I started working in mainframes. Huge jump from that side of tech to mainframes. But I spent about 6 years working inside of the mainframe space in financial services, which gave me a whole lot of experience. I think it's pretty different than a lot of the product people that I run into. I was responsible for a real asset, which the place I worked, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, is a really small but really important hinge in the financial services of the United States and really the world. So it's called the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. There's two sides. The depository, which is where all of the stocks and bearer bonds and stuff are held. That was created because of stock fraud, and they needed a place where everybody could just trust what they were holding. And then there was the clearing side, which is, hey, buyer, hey, seller, do you have what you say you have? And so we're going to clear both sides of the trade to make sure that the trade is on the up and up. And so to give you a sense of scale, DTCC is one of the only places that does this. And so sense of scale, last year they did $2.8 quadrillion in transactions. Yeah, right. It's one of those things. It's right. I'm on this small team that's responsible for 90% of those transactions. And so when I was working on the mainframe, I was what they call a systems programmer for the early part, and then I was a systems architect. A systems programmer is a person that does somewhat code and make sure the trains are running on time. And a system architect is the person that oversees the system and has some responsibilities that are very similar to a product manager. And so I had 5 products that I had to oversee, and this was a 24/7 job, right? There's no outage, right? Like if things are down, then that means you're working to get them back up, and you have to work in a matter of minutes to get things to match their service level agreements that you have across the SLAs across the world. And so I spent 6 years there learning how to build products and service products that have a lot of volume, and having to work in institutions that were a bit more conservative, not in terms of politically, but in terms of how they got things done. I had to learn how to be a change agent in that type of space. And so after 6 years there, I get the founder bug again, and then I leave and start another company. This time the company fails, right? I spent about a year building this concept called Arcade School, which was very focused on helping people out of school get jobs in the video game field, which is a minefield. They have a lot of problems in terms of retention rate. And so I spent about a year with a small crew. Again, people followed me. We tried some stuff, didn't work. And then this other half of my career begins. And this other half of my career is been a space where I've been consulting. I've been a product leader. I've worked on a whole bunch of different products, right? So it starts with me working at a firm called Philosophy, where I started doing product strategy, not as a individual contributor or kind of a pseudo leader that I was at DTCC, but as a consultant coming in and working with companies like PwC or Google or Casper, trying to help them get these new products off the ground. And so this is also my first time. Well, at DTCC, I started working with AI products maybe 10, 12 years ago. That's my first time working on this side of tech with AI, right? Which is about an era before this kind of current iteration.
Right, we'll get to it too, yeah.
And then, lots of thoughts there. Then I end up working as I start this era of me doing product leadership. I worked at this company called Informed, where I transformed their pricing strategy, and I also brought them into, I think, a modern version of what they do. And what they do is they help Amazon companies price on the third-party marketplaces, right? When you look at Amazon, you see the prices, right? What they don't tell you is those prices have to change on a regular schedule or Amazon kicks them out, right? And everybody needs to be on the first page. And so this is either done manually, which is fairly expensive, or you have a program that does it, right? I worked for a company called Informed that does it programmatically. Next, I worked at Smart Recruiters, where I was a product leader there, working on their ATS, and so pretty much everything, which I think is going to go into what we talk about, right? Like a lot of what we talk about. I got an inside look at how hiring works from a software programmatic view, as well as an artificial intelligence view. Like I was in charge of the artificial intelligence initiatives there, and as well as some of the other things that are connected to the hiring portion, right? So onboarding, employee engagement, right? Stuff like that. I was the product leader in charge of the product managers that were doing that work. And then I ended up at Pendo running the community at Product Tank for a while. And now somehow I am a professor at Columbia. Don't know how that happened, but yes. And so, yeah, this kind of brings me where we are now.
You know, it's interesting to your point about like what we're talking about today. Like, I continue to be, as I said at the top of this discussion, I think about people like Albie Brown, but other folks like who exist in these really interesting intersections. Because you started off in tech, I'm not gonna say you started off in tech early because tech is first of all as a term it's extremely broad. So, but you've been in tech for a while and you've seen multiple sides and dimensions of tech. Some folks, they kind of sit just in back end or highly technical. Some folks sit like just in strategy or like kind of like consumer experience, consumer experience, design. But like you've experienced multiple dimensions or facets or frames or lanes within the industry. You know, as we look at like the landscape today, and you talk about the fact that you were really getting exposed to and building experience in AI 10, 12 years ago, before it was like this highly accessible, commercialized, commoditized experience we have today. You know, Adam, like trying to think like how I want to frame this. And I know this is a live stream. So I'll say this is, I struggle when I look at tech when it's like a bunch of like majority white folks presenting it as the next big, great thing. Because I've yet to see in tech be some level of vaporware in it, right? And so when I think about generative AI, your nodding is affirming to me because I'm like, that be presented without it creating some harm for Black and brown folks, right? I've yet to also see it be presented and it not. And I don't want to be pessimistic or a Debbie Downer, but as I look at a Sally, I don't know, whatever. I don't. There's a male version of that. I don't want to be. But anyway, the point is, Sad Sam. The point is that like when I think about the content and I think about this space, I think about generative AI. My biggest concern was when I think about all the Black and brown folks that were going to all these coding boot camps, right? So like they might have been like a librarian, or they might not even graduated from college, or maybe got their GED, right? Life happens. They just decide not to do that. And so like they went to a coding boot camp as their way to like break into tech. Tech was presented as like this utopian space where like there's just nothing but money and opportunity and free food and kombucha everywhere as far as the eye can see. Now generative AI comes in, and a lot of those roles that were positioned and heralded as your surefire, secure, no doubt ticket to transform your family, transform your life, are now in jeopardy. And like, do you think I'm overstating or oversimplifying that concern? Do you think that like those entry, because my read is that when I think about tech today, first of all, you look at the landscape. I think we're over like 80,000 jobs have been eliminated since like the beginning of this year, via layoffs or reductions or Chapter 11s. But like, I get concerned about the lack of regulation within the AI space, combined with like the leveraging of the use of generative AI and AI more broadly to eliminate a lot of these entry level or low level transactional coding roles, as really being harmful to Black and brown people who are really trying to pivot into this. But is my analysis, like, you're much more of an expert than this than I am. Is my analysis on that unfair? Is it overblown? Am I being hyperbolic? Like, what are your thoughts there?
No, I think it's really toned down, to be honest with you. There are three pieces to this puzzle that I want to add to the conversation. So the first one, when you mentioned generative I think what goes over most folks' head when they think about generative AI is what is the cost of generative AI? And I don't just mean in money. There's also a service cost that is associated with generative AI. And this cost of service is called human in the loop, right? There's, long story way less long. In 2016, Microsoft tried an AI bot on Twitter. It was going to take all of the world's information and spit out like cool tweets. And within, I think, 2 minutes, it starts blurting out racial slurs. And that was one of the benchmarks for what most AI practitioners and researchers realizing that we need to have this thing called human in the loop, meaning we need to have a human that is watching or curating the content that the AI spits out. Because if they just took everything blindly, you're going to get the worst of humanity. Why do I bring that up? When we talk about generative AI, there's a human in the loop underneath all of the transactions that you get out of a ChatGPT or a Gemini or whatever service that you're using. Underneath all of those, they are called tokens, right? When you submit something, you're submitting a token and it's getting spit back out at you. There is a human underneath checking the input and looking to see if it matches. Now, where are those humans? A lot of those humans are in Africa. A lot of those humans are in Southeast Asia. A lot of those humans are in Latin America. So when you talk about the cost of these technologies, one of the hidden costs that I think people need to consider, which may not be in the public consciousness right now, is that when you're using these services, there is probably a person in the global south that has to endure. Now, these people have to endure what I talked about earlier. They have to endure the racism. They have to endure the nudity, sometimes as far as child pornography, in order for us to get those prompts coming back in a way that is somewhat usable. And so when we talk about cost, I think there's a heavy psychological cost to a lot of the generative AI tools that we use that, again, goes unspoken. So that's one piece. The second piece, I find it interesting that as much as we've talked about AI, you mentioned vaporware, a lot of what people promise has nothing to do with the capabilities of artificial intelligence, or as artificial intelligence as we understand it today. I saw this when ChatGPT 3 came out, and there was this huge explosion of companies and venture capitalists going, I think I heard one say this was going to replace Google, which to me signaled a complete misunderstanding of what the power of generative AI is. One thing I tell my students and I tell people when they engage with artificial intelligence is that artificial intelligence has no taste. That was hinted at my first part of this story. I want to really hammer it here. AI has no taste, which means it doesn't know if it's telling you the truth or not. It has no concept of the truth. It just knows this information seems like it goes together, and so we put it together. So when these systems or these people or these venture capitalists talk about this technology is going to be able to decipher research for us, or if they talk about this technology is going to replace programming at a core level or at an entry level, what is unsaid is the AI has no concept of what they're building and why they're building it. And so what you're going to end up having is a lot of code that's broken, and they don't know that code is broken, right? When I was at DTCC, I wrote code at the metal level. I used to write assembler. And one thing that I understood rather quickly when writing code that close is that little tiny mistakes compile fairly quickly. If you have a bunch of Python code that people are writing and that Python code is not being checked, over time, there'll be slight problems with that code. That code will keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And over time, right, you're going to have a broken system. Something bad is going to happen because you don't have any quality assurance, right? Quality assurance is supposedly done by the machine. It isn't. So either you're going to have a human in the loop on that level, which if you're going to have that, then why, right? Why engage in that? Because you're going to need somebody that understands code to look at it. So you're just hiring the same person back over again. Or you're going to be okay with mistakes, which, I don't know, depending on what type of company you run, it may be fine. If you're some game company and something breaks, it sucks. Everybody gets a little sad, but you'll be okay. But if it's your money and a decimal point goes a different direction or a different place, all of a sudden you're a lot more upset. I thought I paid $700. Why is this charging me $7,000? And so there's that in terms of vaporware, right? A lot of these things are not going to pass muster when put under a production level or being made at scale, which when I look at and I talk to or I'm around these founders or CEOs, right? They're aware of that. Not to mention, if they don't have the money to run with the bulls, and the bulls in this case are OpenAI or Microsoft, Google, right? Apple soup. Right? If you don't have that type of those pockets, speaking of product strategy, those larger companies are just going to eat whatever feature that you do. You're doing product testing for them, right? Once they figure out what you're doing, right, they have the resources and means to pull it in, and you have no defense. Third thing you mentioned, regulation. There's good news on that front. So I think it was last week, Europe passed a whole lot of regulation as it relates to artificial intelligence. And as somebody that worked at Smart Recruiters, this is something that I dealt with a lot. And what I dealt with were companies in Europe going, we know regulation's coming. We're not even trying to use any AI products right now. It's going to be a waste of time. Not to mention a lot of them didn't work, right? They didn't work the way that, back to that second point. So they just passed the regulation. The EU just passed the regulation, which focuses on observability, right? What is observability? Observability is I have to know how this AI made the decision and what decisions it made along the way. So if I am a hiring company and I'm hiring nothing but, I'll use European examples, Oxford grads or Cambridge grads, I can now bring a suit and say, tell me how you got to those decisions, because I don't think Oxford and Cambridge grads are the ones that are right for this role. I think you're just cherry picking. And they have to produce the observability of like, how did they get to those decisions by leveraging the AI? Most companies where AI is right now, they know they're going to fail. So they're just, again, I'm not even going to mess with it. I don't want to deal with it because much like GDPR, right? The fees associated with these, the penalties are pretty high. So what does that mean for the US? Well, a lot of companies do not want to, they want to work in Europe. They want to make stuff for Europe, right? Because it's a sizable, call it what it is, sizable white money base for tech. It's not going to make sense to make something for the US and not make something for Europe. And so the regulation over there is quite impactful. You can also look at, I mentioned GDPR earlier. European regulations flow back over here. And so with GDPR, like California released their own version of GDPR. I think last year, it took a couple of years, but last year they released their own version of GDPR. And if California releases, that's a big extension of what I talked about with just Europe. If California or New York or any one of these states release any regulation, it effectively counts for the entire U.S.
Right.
Because what are you going to cut out? You're going to cut out California? Like, that doesn't make sense. And so working in HR tech, I saw this a lot with posting salaries. Once Colorado and New York did it, it's like, all right, we all might as well just create the space, do it programmatically, because eventually you're going to have to do it for everybody, especially in this world of remote. And so when it comes to regulation, I think there's more progress happening. I don't love Biden by any means, but the SEC and the FTC have been pretty solid. I think they're really thinking about these things. Biden came out with the AI Bill of Rights, which I think is a start. It's kind of nonsense, but it shows that there's some movement and something that companies are going to have to start to reckon with as they move forward. And if you combine that with the other two things, I think you're going to see a lot of movement in the AI space in the next couple of years. It's not going to be as fast as they promise, because they got to go solve these
it's interesting. We're talking about, the initial, the core of my question also is really about like the impact to Black and brown talent who are coming into tech, right? You said you felt like I'm being mild, like I'm understating it even still, right? So what would you say about like the landscape of work today and historically marginalized talent as it relates to like the world of tech and coding? I mean, and then Adam, like, you and I, we exist also at the intersection of Black Twitter and Black tech spaces. And there's some, there's some elitism that happens in these spaces too. I think that's more like human nature. But like, oh, I'm a coach, so I'm really interested in products. You're not really in tech. You're tech. You're ancillary, or you're in sales. You're not really in tech. Like I know how to write in Python. I know how to write in JS. I know how to write in X, Y, and Z. Like when you think about AI and the current landscape, like what does that do to this population of people who are trying to still figure out where and how they move in this industry?
So it's interesting that you say that. It's funny. I don't know. I may have misspoke. AI has some part to play here, but I think the more impactful thing is the changing of interest rates. So short-term AI, right? Like, so short-term, people are going to try to bridge the gap with these AI systems, right? They're going to try to avoid hiring entry-level people, and this kind of affects everyone, but more it affects Black folks because they, as you mentioned, it was sold a bill of goods. The changing of interest rates and the destruction of the free ride that venture capital has had over the last few years meant that a lot of pet projects and feel good things have to go by the wayside. And unfortunately, they don't see Black talent as helpful to the business. They see it as photo ops for the most part. And so now that money is getting tighter, a lot of VC companies are, have dissolved. A lot of companies that have held on, right, are probably the long-term players. I think we both follow Dale Johnson. One of the things he talks about a lot is, and I watched this all happen, so it's extra funny to me. A couple years ago, he was basically saying, all right, I don't know where interest rates are going to go. This is a lot of these, like, I just say it frankly, a lot of y'all are pets, right? You don't
People
have
were
any
so
control.
mad at him.
You don't have any power. You don't have any connection.
Bruh. There were big names. People who were guests on Living Corporate, who I remember got on their podcast and said he was dangerous. I remember, now people have pieced it up since then, but I remember Dell being told he was angry and offensive and meaning. Dell has his own brand, he's his own person. This is not no Dell advocacy podcast. So I'm just saying, it was just interesting to see, to your point, right? Like, he was naming all the things that we're seeing now. I remember people telling me, oh, he's annoying. I blocked him. I muted him. He don't know what he's talking about. And it's just interesting to see 2 short years later where things are at.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Dell was one of the last lunches I had before COVID. So weird. It was like him, and then I went to homecoming, and then it was over. But having known Dell, broke bread with him, watching what a lot of people said was hilarious, because the thing that I know about him is he's a thorough person and he likes to ask questions, and he doesn't suffer fools. So if you don't know what you're talking about, he's going to keep asking questions and he's going to discover it. And I think a lot of people in the space, both by outcome and by his questioning, were exposed. And I think at the core of it, it goes back to the zero interest rate point and this pet point, right? In some ways, we know when we're kept. And when somebody exposes it, it brings a lot of anger out of us. And so, super unfortunate part about that is the people that were kept, right? They'll be okay. Unfortunately, a lot of them got off, right? They got their money. They got the DEI checks. They went on the vacations. They spoke at the events. Yes, the trips and all of that. And, within 6 months to a year, all that'll be erased, and they'll just be like, I'm a motivational speaker, whatever, right?
This is the conversation I want to have. Let's keep going. Keep it going, Adam. Let's go.
Yeah. They'll be motivational speakers. They'll be, they'll go out there and they'll be fine. Who I feel for are the people that they've led into a slaughterhouse. I know people who went for it. It's almost like Gary Vee. Gary Vee is a white version of this. Gary Vee led a lot of people to slaughter with his YouTube channel, where he would get up there and he would tell you, all you have to do is hustle and post on Twitter, and you too will make hundreds of thousands of dollars. You just got to keep hustling, man. Meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of people who are just right. They followed that. They committed. They went all in. They went to the. They went to the. What is it? He was very big on selling things, and so they went to eBay and they sold everything. And they. What is it when people have stuff outside?
Garage sale.
Uh, Garage sales. Yes, very big on the garage sale stuff, and they went out and sold everything, and then they just ended up broke and in debt because they went all in. A lot of I hear a lot of the same talk from these people who push that angle. Hustle, drop out of everything. There's $200,000 jobs where you don't have to do anything. Product in particular. There are a lot of scam artists in product. All you got to do is go in there and you got to say the right things and off you go. And you got a $200,000 job and you don't have nothing to do. And that's where it's very different from the product life that I lived, which is a very stressful job where you got to be on your toes. And what a lot of them, unfortunately, found out is that it is very easy to get fired as a product person.
It's a ton.
Very easy. And they will get you up out of. You got the job. Yeah, you got the job. You signed it. See if you make it past 2 paychecks. Right? They don't tell people that part.
Yes.
They don't tell how some of these companies are just going to chew you up and spit you out. They tell them that you're by the beach, you're tapping on the keyboard, and you're fine, right? While they make their $5,000-$10,000 going to talk at these same companies, guiding these people into these mills. They're all fighting for spaces to be, Peter Piper of black talent. And I mean, this is all. I mean, a lot of this has historical precedent, right? Like, there is this functional black middle class whose sole job is to push whenever the power structure says push people into this direction, they do it and they get paid to do that. Right? They see that as their functional job. And so whether it's DEI or anything else, right? I don't know what the next thing is going to be, but when they're finished up doing their motivational speaking, they're going to find the next angle and they're going to be right back in there. And I think it's the responsibility for folks like you or like me to try to save as many as we can. And then when we have positions, right, work with people and try to bring them in. And really, that's the best we can do.
Well, no, so it's interesting because I want to talk about, and Adam, I told you I'd respect your time, right? I don't want to. We're not gonna go crazy long. I want to talk a little bit about how we got connected because it's about a year or so ago, last fallish, maybe, I don't know, but it was a little while ago. But while we were talking, I pulled up these tweets. Yeah. It was like last October-ish, November. Got connected because around that time, I mean, and again, like at the top of this conversation, I talked about layoffs in tech and just layoffs across the board. It's so interesting. Like we're having these conversations about how great the economy is, and yet layoffs are continuing to happen. They're becoming more and more commonplace. A lot of the conversations we're having on Living Corporate this year are about how layoffs are no longer this like last ditch effort, but more now like just a normal lever, one of the several levers you pull in your business to maximize share price, and like what that means for like the reality of the employee experience, and what that means for like innovation and just go to market strategy and impact. Like anyway, so we're having these conversations, but the point is that before we started really more aggressively having these conversations last year they was really not kicking off because they've been happening, but they was really happening, right? And I remember because I'm coming out of a tech industry context and then also consulting, right? So before I got into tech, I was at PwC, I was at Accenture, I was at Capgemini. So I've seen the market in a different way, or in just a much more aggressive way than a lot of folks maybe who are just in industries. It's a different, for people who have been in those spaces, they just know it's different. Anyway, I remember because I tweeted about Afrotech at the time, I was like, dang, like, y'all know black and brown folks are, specifically black folks, since the branding for Afrotech is Afro alluding to Afro-American, Afro alluding to the hair that black people have. Like, since we have to act like things are not what they are, I'll just name it explicitly. Afrotech is branded and meant to attract black people. It's meant to be something that brands leverage their DEI budget or the sub part of their budget, which is really just for black people, which is a subset of their larger DEI budget. It's a very small bit of their budget. And they leverage to say, look at what we're doing to diversify talent pipeline. That's how Afrotech is branded. Afrotech is branded as, hey, we're here for career opportunity, right? That is the perception of the Afrotech brand. We had to have this whole conversation about that when I asked, why is it that Afrotech would be so expensive when we know that black folks are being laid off at a much higher percentage and clip than their white counterparts? And further, why would this event not be something that is like explicitly career enriching, right? And I also stated, hey, for me, I don't really understand why y'all charging black people anything. I don't understand. But whatever. I don't understand, right? Like, I don't understand, like, why is it in this moment you're charging people, $800, $2,000 for parties when people need jobs? And we talked off mic. The reality is, Adam, the mind retains the negative, but the reality is like 80% of the reactions were positive. 80% was, this nigga spitting, right? There was a loud 20% who were like, you hate black women, you hate black people, you don't hold white people to these standards. What are you doing not knowing nothing about me or this platform or the products and services that, right? But something you said, right? Like, and this is not really about Afrotech, like, organizations, like, they're going to do to your point, but like, but I remember we got connected through that. You end up liking a lot of my replies, and then you made your own tweet. Something you said, and I pulled this up. You said, one of the harshest truths I've had to give folks when they're starting to make some money, and I want to be clear because everybody who listens to this is not black. So here when you say make some money, starting to make some money don't mean making millions of dollars. Started for black folks, when we say you start to make some money, like, you start to make some money, you might be making 50, 60, maybe low 50, some money. Okay. So I want to emphasize that because I love our language, but I want people to really receive that. One of the harshest truths I've had to give folks when they to make some money is how the quote unquote talented 10th will burn you to make an extra dollar and won't shed any tears. Like, and then a brother said, can you expound on this point? I'm trying to understand more clarity. Are the talented 10th desirous of earning more money for your own sake or theirs? And then you replied, they are in cliques and you should be suspicious of them. We are drones to them to be used. This anyway, but then you just made that. There's this middle class black population, and I would even extend it to black and brown population, that drive their value by differentiating themselves from poorer black people to then emphasize their value to larger structures, right? To larger power structures. I just want to hear more about your perspective on that in this landscape, because you're right. Like, it makes me sad. I think that was my whole point, Adam, is, hey, I'm not really worried about the people that own Afrotech. I'm not worried about the people that are going to be on these stages, because they have the connections, they have the relationships, they have the clicks. They're going to be okay, right? Their debts are going to continue to be managed. They're not going to ever be paid off, but they'll continue to be managed. I'm more concerned about the people who look at this, believe it's something real, and are led astray, and really have to start all the way over for real. But I just want to hear more of your perspective on that, because as soon as you tweeted that, because I always wanted to connect with you. But as soon as you tweeted that part, I said, "No, I got to talk to you. Like, I want to have you on here to talk about like the meta of this work in this space."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's brutal, right? One thing I learned when I moved here, New York City is very cliquish, right? Um, I've come to find out, like, LA and San Francisco, all these places are very cliquish, right? And they particularly look for people like them, and then they just kind of hype their friends up, right? All of this is a way to take all the air out the room, right? You get one person, you get all your people in, and then you just, you know, you're the managerial class for Black folks, right? This is how the talented 10th kind of thing moves on. It grows from there. And when you look at these types of events, and I mean, not to put my aluminum, like, sometimes I say this thing where aluminum foil at them, where just like, I got the cap on, right? I'm really thinking, you know what I mean? Like, I'm really into it. But like, sometimes I feel like those spaces are generated to do that, to just sap resources, right? They're created to sap resources, the limited resources that folks have. Because if you have disposable income, you start to have some way of looking up and going, things are fucked
Right.
up. Things are fucked up. But if I keep selling you hope, then you keep throwing your disposable income towards that hope, right? You're going to have to keep chasing that disposable income. Especially, and even better, if I send you to a place where you're not going to get any skills or you're not going to improve your lot in life. One of the books that I found extremely important about this point, like, and really opened my eyes to see how, like, all these things are patterns. E. Franklin Frazier wrote this book called The Black Bourgeoisie. And what is in it is he did I think a 50 or 60-year study of Black middle class people. Just basically traveled the country, just taking notes, right? And then he compiled it into this book called The Black Bourgeoisie. And what you get when you read it is you start noticing the same behaviors have happened every era, right? The book starts off with drinking, binge drinking. Talked about parties. What do you think happened at all these parties? A lot of binge drinking, out of control drinking, everybody throwing up and, uh, doing behaviors that aren't, past the point of this podcast, right? All of it, right, is something. It's very similar to what folks were doing in 1890. Not much change, right? And each chapter of that book kind of goes through these different behaviors. And if you talk about Afro, even like the pushback you got, it's all in there, right? It's the same thing. We talked about the talented 10th. One thing I like to bring up when bringing up, the talented 10th and W.E.B. Du Bois is that his thoughts changed, right? He evolved past that point. And he died a communist and really despising the Black managerial class. Like, he had a political transformation. And a lot of the attacks that he got, as he started kind of discovering and going like, oh, this is BS, right? W.B. Du Bois, for folks who don't know, right, we're talking about the person that invented data visualization. First Black person to graduate from Harvard. Known as just this towering intellectual who had to like relearn his life after a certain point. Like, he got kicked out and he had to like relearn, like, from the outside looking in, and it changed his whole perspective. Fantastic person to read about. I highly recommend it. Folks, go grab a biography. It's great. Sharice Burton-Stelly is one of my favorite academics on W.B. Du Bois. So pick up one of her books. She's great. all the attacks that you got are very similar to the attacks that he got, right? Pointing these things out, right? That's why I said all the hits. These, if you go look at like newspaper articles, right? The you hate black women. You hate black people. You don't talk white people. But like it's the same stuff. Like it's almost like ingrained. It's a trained behavior. So at this point, even when I see it, right, I think about the book and I think about him and I think about what, like, it means I'm on the right track, right? Like, it means I'm saying something honest. Because if I was saying something cool, I'd be in the clique. Right? If I wanted to give it up and just, get by, I'd be in the clique. And if you ever hear these people talk, for the most part, right, outwardly they talk about, hey, we want to help people, we want to, but when you sit there and you listen to them, right? Because I'll go speak at conferences. I'll go find like, sometimes these people be intermingled. All the conversation is about extraction. You realize they don't give a damn about anything they say. Like, it's just about how can they do this, and then how can they take the extraction and go on some trip somewhere.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, so we're come my challenge in this season, right? Especially because it was funny, right? Like all these critiques about DEI that are coming from the right, it's just ironic because it's like, if you talk to black folks who are actually in the quote unquote arena of DEI, the people actually doing the work will tell you that this work has been challenged for decades, for a long time, and that there are bad actors, that there are that oftentimes it is about extraction. It is about it's not really building, and or it's certainly not about wealth redistribution or power sharing or anything like that. It's about, hey, what can I do to get what I need so I can get mine and go on and do what I want. Um, and so, man, I appreciate you. I know we're coming up on time. I definitely feel like we need to do a part two. But as we talk about as we talk about like just the landscape of work, because you made a point earlier that this is really impacting everybody. This is not like a black thing or a brown thing or a male thing or a queer thing or a woman thing. This is about how the world of work is going to be impacted by like some of the class dynamics, some of these pressures, regulatory changes, but then also like these like capitalist demands of like heightened production and just extraction over and over and over, and the schools like bleeding the stone as much as you can. What advice would you give to like black and brown careerists, right? Irrespective of where they are, early, mid, late, on navigating this next season, this next phase of work? Because to be honest, it's a little spooky to me. I don't. Part of me kind of feels like I know what's going to happen, but part of me, I'm like, I don't know where we're going. Like, what advice? Like, what three? If it's 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, just what thoughts do you have? What advice would you share?
Yeah, and yeah, I want to make this super clear too, right? Like, when I say everyone, I definitely don't want to marginalize black people because when America has a cough, black folks have the flu, right? So like it's always going to be worse for us. What I would recommend to people who were looking, try to build as many informal networks as you can,
Hmm.
and that has been super helpful in my career. It's given me a lot of freedom, flexibility. Right, as I mentioned before, I'm a professor at a university. I had no idea that was going to be in the cards for me. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have been like, "What? What are you talking about?" But that's just because I created a lot of informal networks. Um, I've worked publicly a lot, right? So, and I work in places where um, I have bona fides, which will come if you do the other two things and you work, right? People start to vouch for your work because it'll be good, it'll get better, it'll be better. And so, one of the things I always recommend is start building in public and start creating informal networks. I'm naturally an introvert, but you got to find some way to get out the house and start to connect with people. Because if you don't, and I mean all types of people, just keep shaking hands and kissing babies. The second thing is work on your skills, right? Find spaces where you can, right? Try to figure out what you want to do, and then just, right, 15, 20 minutes a day, right? 15, 20 minutes a day. Work on it. And try to find spaces where you can make money doing it. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just try to find a place where you can get $50, $75, right? The idea is to start to create, using these informal systems and working in public, to start creating different income flows as much as you can. Because right at this point, you brought up a really important point. The stone squeezing has not stopped. It is only going to get worse. And the more community and informal networking that you can do, right, it starts to mitigate some of that as much as you can, right? If you start to bring in your own money, right, it becomes a lot less painful when the layoff happens. And even if you're building towards making something else or making career changes, if you're constantly working on that, the pain will be less, right? You can get back on your feet and you can keep moving. And so I tell them, like, especially for Black folks, stay connected with Black folks that aren't those extracting folks. Go and expand and explore. Go engage, go work in public, and just go work on your craft little by little, right? And you'll start to find opportunities, and that's gonna be your way.
Adam, look, man, I appreciate you. I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for this incredible conversation. We're going to put your links and everything in the show notes. I appreciate you because you were a friend of the show. And, man, we'll talk to you soon, brother. Thank you again, for real. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.